Welcome back for all of our listeners. And if you're new here, hello and welcome. I'm Kimberly, your host, and this is The Parent Solution, your one-stop shop for all things educational. Today, I have a guest with me, and his name is Paul Sambataro. Paul is a retired school psychologist with a doctorate in neurobehavioral psychology. He is also an author. He has written the Emotional Budgeting Workbook and the Narrative Cognitive Development. He has two upcoming publications, The Bipolar War and The Autism Revolution. And I'm excited to have him here with me today. Welcome, Paul. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, and thank you. I'm really happy to be here today.
Maybe, if you don't mind, tell our listeners a little bit about your experience dealing with children or your experience with children during your career.
Yes, I'm going to keep the short of it because it's been a fairly lengthy one. But in the short, the last 3 years, I'm retired from school, psychology, and that was really important because I was administrating academic and cognitive assessments, and those really supported some of the topics we're going to discuss today, because they, from my studies and from my research, really validate what we will be discussing today. And in addition to that, we did have a clinic in which we also worked with children, but they were more with disabilities that were a little more severe than what you might on the average student. So we did work with severe disabilities, but in the end, when the functional brain does the same thing for every individual.
And so you talk about the brain as the functional brain. And I mean, I'm certainly not a neurologist or a psychologist. I definitely can see patterns in terms of like emotional regulation and in terms of physical behavior patterns that are repeated. I know your specialty, if I'm not mistaken, is in emotional regulation, right? And in how that relates to the brain.
Well, what I believe is that that's the most practical way of getting results. So there are a lot of areas in which multidisciplines in which to come to that point. Obviously, there are many divisions in psychology and psychiatry, but from my practical experience, this is the quickest way to obtain results, to get the behaviors that we consider functional and positive versus adverse behaviors that we all understand and have resulted in the kind of treatments that we think of, like discipline or other various ways of treating maladaptive behaviors.
Okay. And so I definitely see what you're saying in terms of, I like how you put it, maladaptive behaviors. I think that's a very politically correct term for saying bad behavior. So what is it that is your solution that we might be able to offer to parents that may be listening, or even to educators or people who deal with children on a regular basis, instead of, like you say, disciplinary action or some other sort of solution?
And I think this is really, I'll have to backtrack a little bit on this foundational thing here, and it may sound like I'm wandering, but some of the experience in school was sitting down with the parents and the children and the teachers and supervisory staff at the same time, and we called it the round table, or something in which there was a consensus or deciding a strategic pathway for the student if they qualified or were not qualified for special education.
Right.
And it's very interesting because you have so many stakeholders with various ideas of what the idea of correcting behavior is, from the parents to the school to various medical. And in the end, it's when with the parent, and I'm addressing your audience as parents and not professionals and not school staff, but parents, we can get a lot of anxiety, and I include myself, when we see our children doing things that we know are dangerous, self-harm, or hurting others. And it is in that inflection moment that, with the experience I have with the assessments, the idea is the important concept here is that children who, on the most part, are experiencing maladaptive behaviors or behaviors that are injurious, there is pain. And that pain, we don't think of it as pain that we have when we hurt our legs, or children know, and parents identify pain as something that's happened physically to the body, and they can visually see what's going on. This is what I denote pain when the child experiences, or the student experience, or even adults experience something is not right in there, and they feel out of sorts. And the foundational issue here is, from the child's perspective, everyone is trying to answer that question. Why? Why are you doing this? It's not advantageous to anything. You're not going to finish school, and so on. But the child is trying to answer the same question the parents is, why? And they have only the sensories that they recognize: vision, hearing, smell, touch. These are the things that they see or that they use to try to make sense of their world. So if they're in pain and they don't really recognize it as pain, their brain does, perhaps, and is sending them signals to make a correction, to get help. They may not recognize that, so they're trying to make sense of their world. Every individual actually tries to make sense of the world, but we're discussing it from a parent-child perspective here. And the child is trying to make sense of the world, and they're going to land on what they see and what they hear as the root of their pain. And it's not, whether it's right or wrong, it really makes no difference, to the child. He's trying to make sense of their world. And that is generally without the education and without the knowledge of what is really actually happening in their brain. So then we get these behaviors that are pretty much similar, but may have multi-different reasons behind them. For example, if a child is susceptible to ADD, or there may be a cognitive issue, that child won't know. But they'll have the same lashing out or defiance or some other issue that looks the same as every other child when they're with their bad behavior. But the cause might be different. And the fastest way to see the difference is a couple ways. One is identifying what their cognitive assessment is, or looking at that, because a lot of times there's issues that indicate where the differences are in their functional abilities. So they may have they may be normal in one area of the brain, but have difficulties or weakness. We call it strengths and weakness, just to be, not to be stigmatized. But it's weaknesses and strengths, and everyone has them. And without that knowledge and information, nobody knows. I mean, the professionals don't know, the school doesn't know, the child doesn't know, the parent doesn't know until that assessment has been made. There may be other indicators that they have, but generally speaking, without knowing how the brain is operating, we can make a lot of assumptions too, as parents or as professionals. And so it's really important to get information of that sort. It's also important, when you don't have the information, to have a conversation with that child and recognize that that child is in pain. Now, it may not be the kind of pain that we feel we're facilitating being spoiled, or facilitating, a child's willingness to take advantage, or an opportunity of sympathy. However, there's always a root. And by having that conversation with a child and saying, hey, I understand this. We don't know what it is. I think it's hurting. I think it's painful. Then the child will look to the adult as the authority. Because if the parent rejects the child feelings of pain or hurt, or not understanding why their function is lower than their classmates, or they're not feeling functional in a given situation, they're going to look to their peers. And
Of
that's what
course.
generally happens. Self-medication is a looking to their peers for answers. And self-medication may not start early, or it may continue, or it may just be eventually in middle school or high school. And if the parent takes control by saying, I see that you are struggling, I know that this is the bad behavior as a result, that you're hurting somewhere, we may not know, but we're going to try and do this together. So bringing the child on board and having the parent even just say, hey, this might be a problem. We're going to work together, and I'm going to help find people that are professionals or something that may help in this situation. Let's find out what it is. Then that helps the child anxiety. That helps the child feel secure. Even if the problem has not been identified and has not been resolved, the child will take comfort that someone is hearing them and someone is trying to work on the situation.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, it's equally important that the parent does not give away their authority to other groups, such as the school or professionals, in solving their child's issue. I'm not saying that they can't be involved. They should be involved. Everyone should be there as a team. But don't give the authority away to others because you think that will help solve your child's case.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, the parent should not, or is most likely not going to know the problem, obviously, or there wouldn't be one, or they would help solve the child's problem on their own. But that's not the issue. The most important thing here is to keep the child eyes on the parent, and in a collaborative and in an invested way. If you hand it off to the school, or you hand it off because parents are busy, they're working, they want to hand it off. They want to hand it off to other authorities to make it because they know they have the knowledge. However, the child will hand off at the same time. They'll hand off looking at the parent as the authority. And pretty soon we've involved third parties in every decision that we make with our children. And ironically, it's that good intentions lead to, sometimes down the road. Perfectly good intentions, it doesn't mean bad. But in a child's life, a young child's life, and I'm not talking about maybe over 18, it's a real struggle because of all the laws of independence. But before 18, the parent should have the ability to keep the authority to help that child as a mediator, as a facilitator, as someone who provides support for that child, even if they don't have the answers. And that provides so much help, because I can't tell you how many times I've been at that round table and my conversations with the children, they're nodding their head in agreement. I explain why their cognitive assessment explains some of their behaviors, why they feel, actually how they feel, and then how they feel comes through the behaviors.
Mm-hmm.
And the children are nodding, they're agreeing, they understand, they're relaxed, they get it. But the problem comes with the parents, the staff, and everyone else who is asserting authority rather than knowledge to the table. And that's where it's so important that the parent, while handing off, gaining knowledge, please know that the child is looking to the parent for this. So the importance here with the cognitive assessment and the emotional is then we understand that we have several kinds. Our brains process information from all sorts of areas. But the most neglected area and I'm not suggesting from yesterday or from 100 years, but for 4,000 years, 6,000 years, we have not advanced emotional understanding or emotional help for the brain. Not one small part. All we've done is added more more data, more choices is really the appropriate thing here.
Mm-hmm.
So in the end, we are talking about structure, but we've added more things that the child needs to determine or make choices. And that's where we start to get our anxiety and the breakdown of the processing in the brain, because there are so many different ways the brain, the development of the brain.
Mm-hmm.
So before I continue on that thread, I just want to mention too, in particular, that we mentioned that I am writing on the books of the Bipolar War and the Autism Revolution, and they are for a purpose, because in the end, those are going to be determined how the brain is developing, the pathways that the brain is developing.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, we've turned, well, I think without really understanding brain development, we've turned how the brain works for individuals, because of their lack of function or functional issues, into stigmatism, into branding disorders, mental health disorders. And while that's okay in order to treat as medicine and such, it doesn't give us the understanding that we're all on a spectrum of brain development. And it is of interest to the parents to not have that, and the child to not think that they're abnormal or have disorders, because that is becoming more and more prevalent, this internalization of things that we might have that make us abnormal. And it's unfortunate, because the education part of this for everyone is that everyone has strengths and weaknesses built on the pathways, whether you're on the autistic spectrum or you have symptoms that are similar to bipolar. Those are spectrum. That means in any given situation, any of us will have a meltdown or get overloaded processing. And some individuals are more susceptible than others for different reasons and have different reactions, even though ultimately, and we swing back to bad behaviors. Mm-hmm. Because ultimately, no matter how your brain is developed, if something is wrong, you'll have a bad behavior. You'll make a bad decision. Really, it's problem solving, and good problem solving methods and poor problem solving methods. And so we've solved a lot of problems technically. We've even solved a lot of problems financially. So we have developed the world's most advanced financial programs, financial budgeting, and that's where we get to emotional budgeting. Because just like finances, we are introducing the ability to do the same thing with emotions. Mm-hmm. We would never, ever try to have a household if we didn't have a budget. And that doesn't mean it has to be written down. It's in the head. You know, you can't survive without having income and spending, whether it's food, electricity, anything. Whether it's simple or complicated, you have a running budget in your head, or it's on paper, line item. And the only way to problem solve, or the best way to problem solve, you can problem solve, but you may not make the best decisions without having a written budget. Because if you have a written budget, you have a daily plan. You have a line item, line item being that you spent so much on a car, you spent so much on television, you spent so much on food, you spent so much. So if there's a problem and you overspent that month, you can go back through the financial budget and strategize how to do better, or how to save, how to move money around, how to spend less here and more there. Mm-hmm. We have nothing for that for emotions. We just think everyone should just be capable. Just do it. You know, you got a problem, think it through, whatever. But we wouldn't dare do that for finances. I mean, yeah, we do. Excuse me. I will back that up. We all do it,
but we shouldn't, is what you're saying.
It should, and we make so much better decisions when we put it on paper. Because then we don't argue with our spouses. We don't argue with our spouses. We don't have meltdowns. We don't have anxiety moments. Well, less, and we're able to problem solve.
And this brings to mind, like, just the idea with comparing finances to emotions, and how we do financial budgeting, and we don't necessarily do emotional budgeting. This brings to mind, there's a saying somewhere, I don't remember who said it, probably some famous person, or some psychologists. He said brains are for having ideas. They're not for holding them. And so this idea of, I mean, particularly in terms of finances, of like having ideas or like having information in our brain, it's not necessarily, our brain is not meant for holding that sort of information, speaking specifically with finances. I don't know if you've got any opinions on that as a psychologist, what you would say brains are really meant for. But I do agree with the premise that emotions should be looked at the same as budgeting. So is it like an idea of being able to have like like the same way that we plan our finances, we would also sort of plan our emotions? Is that what you're getting at?
Well, ultimately, it's really just about facts.
Mm-hmm.
In finance budget, it's not that you budget it. You only budget it if there's a problem, or when you get to the end, you make the decision. In emotional budgeting, it can be confusing, and it's vexing to me to really label it in the way that it's meant to. But the important thing here is it's a place to put down facts. And the beauty of this, it's not about going into a counselor and saying, hey, this and so and so. The facts are the facts. Now, if you don't have to share what your decision is going to be, but what happens is when you put down the facts, the beauty of all of this is that now you have the facts in your, just like you have the facts of your finances. Those are facts on line item facts. You spent this much money. Mm-hmm. Same thing with relationships. It's a fact, and it's a fact in the way that my action is this. What is the other person's action? And what is the consequence? Simplified version. But after that's done, then you can look at it and say, okay, if I don't like that, what can I do? And you look at the facts, and then you can say, hey, what are my options here? But that comes after you put the facts down. And the important reason behind this is two. One, in finances, we send the emails or we send the programs around the world. We all can look at a spreadsheet. We can all look at the same spreadsheet and make decisions together or have consultation. If a person's emotions in their mind, if we go to a counselor and we just say something, it's not really a fact. It's who knows what it is. And the counselor's reply is who knows what it is. It's not something that's really difficult to share unless everyone's writing the same thing down on both sides. Mm-hmm. When you write the facts down, you're just writing about the relationship and consequences. And in that moment, then after that can be shared with parents, mom, dad, if the child wants to share it, but it'll be what comes from that, in addition to that ability to share, is that there are actually a physiological, something happens in the brain. And that's the other important part here. It's not just having that on paper. The brain actually starts to categorize what you put on paper. It actually starts to build its own files. It actually builds small rivers of networking to build those files and put them on file. The event of post-traumatic stress, for example, which can be anything. It can be a bad budget day, bad expenditure, and all of a sudden, spouse or a couple will have experienced trauma of not being able to deal with their finances. Same with emotions. If we get overwhelmed, it may not be coming out in files. It comes out in what we would say a veteran experiences war memory. He comes back, has a small argument with spouse, and all of a sudden, his processing center is flooded with the memory of when he was in war. That's not good, because now he's not only contending to process what's happening in front of him, he's trying to process what happened 2 years ago in some war. And that's a dramatic, but it happens to us all the time. If we are with someone for 10 years, and when we go to have a conversation with that individual and there's differences, or it gets emotional, or when I say emotional, it escalates into, higher blood pressure or excitement. Those memories are paired by that excitement. So then it's even worse, because those memories paired by that excitement comes out into the processing center. And all 10 years of problems that may be unresolved are all going to come together. And for someone to try and process all that at once is a Herculean task. It's just beyond scope. So then it usually dissolves into non-regulated problem solving. So with children, it may seem that, as adults, we manage this somehow, or it may seem like we manage it, but a lot of times it actually isn't managed. And we can see that by the lack of problem solving when it comes to political discourse, for example. We're really speaking to each other in anxieties, stress, and the not able to problem solve beyond what, our ideas of how we feel. And so children are really great. It works for everybody, but children are much better at writing down the facts and then building those files, because their developing brain, that's what the neurons do. They build new pathways, like playing the piano. Most people will not play the piano unless they play the piano. And so you have to, just like finances, write it down so that you visually absorb what you're writing to build those files. And then as the brain visually sees it, and the motor skill of writing it also goes to the brain. So it's two parts. I haven't actually done any audio, understand how audio might work, but I do know that motor writing physically and visually seeing what you're doing provides that impetus for the brain to file those, what you've written down as part of the facts, just like you would if it was a financial. It works, but it works better if you're able to do both.
Yes.
So yeah, we have efficacy. It's not that you have to, it's just that it works better. So you have the two parts here. You're building files to keep separate so they don't come out, so a child can process much more effectively, much more efficiently. And especially children who may have, if there's behavioral issues, there's most undoubtedly they're susceptible to a couple things. If it's on the autistic scale, or even on the bipolar symptoms of those sorts, ADD, any of that, a child works best if they're able to filter, their brain is able to filter better job or manually. So when the files are built, the information going into those files, or the files coming back into memory when they're answering to their parents, is going to be much more succinct, and the problem solving will be much greater. Positive problem solving be much more effective. And that's the whole point here, is to begin the process of bringing strategic emotional development to children and people that we have not, has not been developed in any place around the globe. It's just not seen as something, I'm not sure, possible, or so we're here to begin that process.
Yeah, I don't know that people have not necessarily tried to make it easier. I think that there definitely is, like, everybody is different, right? There are a lot of, I think, answers that people are looking for, and it's maybe that they haven't found the right one for them. But that's kind of what we wanted to talk about today. When we were first chatting, I was really impressed with your publications that you've made. So your idea of creating something that's helpful for parents and particularly for children. Did you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yes, the book is doing, is what I've kind of discussed here, and that's during the process of going through the motion of getting the facts out for relationships. So you start off with your family. You want to do the relationships in the family. It's not about making points or trying to say something is bad or good. There is no bad or good until after it's completed. Then the judgment can be done, but the facts need to be put down for the brain. It's not it's difficult. It's actually it's not easy because there's a lot of resistance to putting down an emotion or a fact that is the development of an emotion, because it may not be the thing that a person wants to hear in that moment. So it's really
No,
crucial.
absolutely not.
It's really crucial, though, to have that down as a fact and then make the judgment or see what the positive options are. That's the beauty of that. You can't do it if you don't put it down and see what you can do. Just like finances. Yeah, you can do it in your head. We do it all the time, but it's not very efficient. And it ends up with children who are susceptible going off the rails. That's really, if you have a good kid and there's no problems, the amount of help it does is not necessarily a given. It should, because a person is developing files in any case, but the difference between their good behavior and good behavior, it's going to be very minimal. One of the things that I would just like to mention, though, the difference between this, say, than in yoga or you were mentioning other options is really huge, because when we try to do something as meditation, we're really trying to block out sensory. We're trying to say, stop the sensory from coming in. But that's not the reality of our world. Sensory is coming in from social media everywhere, all these choices. And that's where the feeling that there's chaos and disorganization creeps into everything. And so structure becomes distorted into what we think is structure, with more authoritarian type rules, because they're more structured. And, it's great because those organizations, which hopefully, churches, they offer structure for this. And they also offer unconscious rules that we don't have to pay attention to, because we go along with them and not make a choice. But once we start making choices, or we feel like we have to, then the structure kind of goes away and the anxiety creeps up and the processing of trying to do all that begins. So meditation, for example, is great. I have nothing against it, but it's not building files in your head. It's actually preventing information so you can calm and give time to process. So if we say, I count to 10, count to 10 before you say something to a child, because you want them to process what they're doing. If we meditate for 20 minutes, we're saying to ourselves, give ourselves 20 minutes to let all this information go and be processed and put in the brain, and then we'll feel better. Yeah, we'll feel a lot better. And that's what we're talking about. But you're not getting new information. You're not building a new file. You're not helping yourself in a stressful situation, or helping to bring the brain to better efficiency or greater function. All you're doing is blocking until your brain has done what it's done at the pace that it's always done. But you're just saying, hey, I'll take half a day and then I won't do anything. Yeah, okay, that's great, because that's what you need. But it's not developing your brain. It's just simply putting it off for another day. And that's the difference. What we're doing here is developing the brain. We're making it better, more resilient, making better decisions. And one of the two crucial issues, I would say, we can look at it this way. When children have ideation, ideas about suicide, they're trying to problem solve. Now, it's a terrible solution. It's not a solution we want, but they're trying to problem solve. They are problem solving. And it's a terrible solution. That's what's going on. They're trying to problem solve. And what we want to do is make sure that they have a way to understand what the facts are, and then they are able to make better choices. Because obviously, for all of us parents, we never want to hear our child say, they feel like hurting themselves, or others for that matter. But they will do that if they do not have any idea about different solutions or why they feel the way they do. And they think that's their problem-solving solution.
That's their best option.
In order to, that's what the brain is doing. The brain is feeding them pain. Now, we may not recognize it as pain, but they do. They feel it is. And so that's their option that they're going to choose, because of the brain sending out signals that something is wrong. and they don't understand it. So they pick online things, or they pick something they see, they pick something they hear, and they try to apply it to solving a problem that's way so complicated. It's taken me, 30 years to really come to this idea because it's of the results. We have had 100% results when people move through, not because they're so much greater, they don't become geniuses, but they're able to do the problem solving when they get through, just like finances. If person is struggling and they are actually making money and they're not, destitute, and they make money, but they spend too much, if you sit down with that person like a financial planner and you go over their books, you say, hey, if you do this, it's going to be a better solution. And the brain is developing while you're doing that because it's actually building the files. So that's the whole gist of all of this.
That's the idea behind it.
I know it's not probably totally clear, but it will be eventually.
No, but I think that's awesome. I do have to thank you for coming on the podcast today. I really appreciate your time and attention, and all of your work that you've done thus far to bring yourself this far, but also to bring the kids that you've worked with, and I'm sure parents and school staff and everybody else that you have had the experience of working with, to bring them this far in that sort of journey with you.
Thank you, Kimberly. I'm really happy that you had me here today.
Of course. Thank you for being here.
If you have any comments or questions, please feel free to reach out. You can always find me on social media. It's Star Students on Facebook and LinkedIn, or starstudents.learning on Instagram. You can also reach out through email, which is all over social media channels. Thank you, as always, so much for listening, and I'll be back next week.